Hello and welcome to The Hunt episode 4. Today joined with me is I was gonna call you illustrious, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I wanted to, you know how sometimes people will do like ludicrous intros for their guests? The illustrious, the mysterious, the weird shit like that. I got Soul Reaper, dude. He's got a fat ass. And yeah, we're gonna talk about Pred. And I named this episode Dire Straits. You gotta bait them in with the topics, but we do have some serious topics to talk about. You can see all the topics at the bottom. If I had better production value, I would highlight them. I'm just too lazy to do that. The bald Soul Reaper. What up, Joey? How's it going, bro?
It's going.
It is going. You just ended your stream, so thanks for the raid. We're going to be talking all about Pred and the last couple of updates and whatnot. Anything you want to lead with to start?
I mean, not really. I'm just get it going. You know what I mean? I don't want to be here all day.
Okay, get it going. Not here all day. All right, so first topic is ranked. We're obviously going to talk a lot about ranked. We're going to get into the brass tacks of it. Ranked was released, I don't even know the date, last weekend on Saturday. I guess for the sake of the video, I'll look up. The date was the 15th, so June 15th, 2024, and it was released in Europe and North America East servers for an 8-hour window at whatever time for the respective server. Now, as a preseason test, so they're calling it, I don't think that the fact that it was like a limited time is an issue. It's just the fact that it's running once a week. Now, my personal thought on this is, and we're going to get into this a lot, is that this should have been done in closed beta or early access. Like, if you're going to do this kind of limited testing to test the physical systems, you shouldn't have done it when you had like a bigger player base that's like publicly facing, when the game is like very publicly facing. And so this isn't a terrible way of testing, but it's a terrible way of testing given the context of like how deep we are into development and like what phase of development we're in. Because obviously ranked modes don't really work when they're limited. At least this limited. So what's your thought on that?
I think it just kind of defeats the purpose of the mode. Like, it's a little deflating on the mode, to be honest with you. The fact that it's limited to daily, I just don't think is good. It being time limited to try to keep queues like as competitive as possible, that's never really been like my issue, anyways, at least. But the fact that it's limited to 1 day a week really just kind of, it doesn't give any reason to play on any day that's not that day or between those specific time frames, which I think just again deflates the game in general, which is not good, obviously, especially since it's one of those like retention features and the game lacks retention features. The only one that they currently have is Affinity, which also has its own issues as well. But ranked being like the major one that should be in the game, especially as like a competitive game.
So I think it's like important to talk about the fact that it is a retention system, and the reason why it's such an important system to have in a game like Predecessor is because MOBAs are inherently competitive. So if it's inherently competitive, the biggest driving force, or at least one of the biggest driving forces for retention, will be ranked. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the majority of players will play ranked, but that it is like an integral pillar of success that needs to be there in order to kind of sustain the ecosystem of a competitive live service title. And so it's not even just the fact that it's limited, it's the fact that like it's limited, or like limited time window, but that it's limited throughout the entire week. And let's go ahead and get it out of the way. They came out with the announcement yesterday or whatever day it was that they are going to be bumping it up to 2 days a week. And my initial thought is like, well, that does nothing. Like you're effectively doing the same thing, just like slightly better. Because the problem with ranked is that like in order for people to get where they're supposed to go, they need to put in a lot of time. They need to put in time. They need to climb over the people that are bad. The people that are bad need to kind of stabilize in their ranks or climb to whatever point they can, and then everybody needs to level off. But when you don't have the time for people to actually level off, then you're not like, the mode is, like you said, it's very deflating. It's very like pointless to the mode itself. Now, adversely, I saw the announcement of the mode and I was kind of already like a little fed up with Pred. I mean, I've been fed up with Pred for months, but obviously I was already kind of fed up with Pred. And I looked at the mode and I saw that it was a Saturday only. I decided that I was going to like hang out with my girlfriend that day. And for me, it was like, well, I'm just not going to play it at all. Like, I probably could have caught like a couple hours of it, but why? Why? If it's only running for 8 hours once a week and I can only probably catch 2 or 3 hours of it, why would I play it at all? But then that extended further for me personally. And I'm just speaking anecdotally here. Then I realized, well, shit, if I can't play that, why would I play the game at all? So now I'm on a 2 week break, and it wasn't really intentional. I just kind of slid into the break from my trip to New Orleans. And now there is genuinely no purpose in me playing the game. Now, the irony is that one of my biggest issues with Pred prior to the release of Ranked was that there was no reason to play the game. And now it's exacerbated by the fact that they gave us a reason to play the game and then stripped it from us immediately. So what are your thoughts on basically anything I just said? Like, I mean, like, I've heard you say it. I've heard you say it. So I'm gonna put the seed in your mind really quickly. I've heard you say like a couple times, like this is probably the worst way to implement a rank system, and I think I mostly agree.
Yeah, I think the way they're going about it is kind of just against the point of the system, which is to grind it and to want to play it all the time and like when you can rent, because you need to get time in to climb, and then you kind of plateau a little bit at some point, and then you want to get better so you can reach like a new level, right? Which is kind of the point of a ranked mode. And I think the way that they're implementing it does not allow that. And I get that they're testing things, but the fact that you have a reason to play, the whole point of the test is to test things. So if you're testing things, how do you test things one day a week? Like you're kind of just at what point are you testing that the queues that there are enough people to play the game? Like that's about the only thing I could think of that you could possibly want to be testing in the first place. In which case you could just get that data in 1 week as opposed to extending that over the course of like 6 or 7 weeks, like it seems like they're gonna be doing. Which just I think defeats the purpose, because then what's the next step? Are they going to take a day away if there's not enough people on that day or something like that? You know what I mean? Which again would be really disappointing to see, or something like that. Are they just going to have a week where they don't extend it? Is it going to be 3 days and then they're just going to be like, well, the fourth day doesn't look like it's going to work because the third day didn't work? How does that make any sense? You know what I mean? Like just because people might not play on a Monday doesn't mean they won't play on a Tuesday. So if you extend it to like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, who's to say they won't play on Tuesday if you don't extend it or something like that? So like that's data that you just can't get unless you don't put it in. And then also the fact that it's only 1 day a week. How are people going to want to continue to grind the game mode, especially like myself? I played 2 or 3 games just to kind of see how the system worked, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure I could get a good opinion on it. So after playing a couple games, it's like, what they actually have, like, is it missing some features? Sure, but it was good enough that I would want to play it every day if they had it in the game, just for the fact that it's a simple reason to want to like play the game. I did not have great games. Like the games that I did play were not great in terms of quality. They were kind of whatever, but that's gonna happen when everybody starts at the same rank. So that didn't really bother me. But I was having a good time playing it just for the fact that I could actually play the game mode and feel like I had a reason to play the game.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point. There's a lot to unpack there. So I want to kind of focus in on a couple things that you said. The main one being that you were like, yeah, there was things missing, and so I want to kind of touch on that. Like, what exactly about the mode is doing like well, or like what is the mode doing well? What is the mode doing poorly on? But before we jump into that, I want to like make a note of what you said, where it's like, hey, like even though it wasn't great, like it's still better than not having it at all. And that's the thing that is really interesting to me, because you're right. I don't really see what they're testing. Like the system itself is like seemingly something that is like more or less already in the game, or like works reasonably, except for like maybe the ban phase. And then the actual like post game screen and updating of VP and whatever. So yeah, maybe they're testing that. But if you're just testing that system, and I'm talking about like the system of the UI that changes and moves the numbers around, that clearly could be done internally. Like you don't really need to test that. They knew going into this open version of it whether or not it was actually
like how much you gain or lose.
Well, not even just how much you gain or lose, but like whether or not the screen can physically display it, right? Like that's all been tested. We have, like, I can tell you that with 100% certainty. So what are they testing? I think you're right. I think it's density numbers. I think they're testing the community, so to speak. They're testing the interest. But again, the irony is I think that it has like an adverse effect, or could have an adverse effect on some of those people, and you can't get that information. You can't get that data, like you said. So like, for example, we saw the player base spike, at least on Steam, for the duration of Ranked, or for the the time period that Ranked was open. So that's a very obvious note, even if it's just like a tight window, or like a tight sample source of data. You can tell that it's very obvious that the human behavior behind that system releasing is excitement and interest, right? Like that system comes out, people want to play it. But for me, it also was adverse to, like, I have an adverse opinion to that, where it's like, well, yeah, the system's coming out, but it's such a limited thing, I don't want to play it at all. And you can't get numbers on that. That's just impossible.
The thing is, I think that's kind of like the competitive mindset is, you're gonna invest time into something, but then you can't invest the time that you actually want to invest into it. So you just put that time into something else that you can actually put your full time into. I feel like, and that's kind of what this creates, in my opinion.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and touch on what you said about like the mode. Like you said, even though the mode wasn't like great or is missing some things, like you still just wanted to grind it. What do you think that the ranked system that you were able to test or that you were able to see was accomplishing, and what do you think that it's like missing or needs to improve on?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that it had was just a reason to play the game, to rank up, whatever. As far as the quality of games, like I said, everybody started at bronze, and you don't really have enough time to really separate people. So, like, the games are going to be hit or miss. Some games are going to be good, some games are not. That's just the way it is when everybody's at the bottom. I do like the fact that you start at the bottom because I think that's generally good. I didn't actually get to get a promo game, but I did hear that you promo between like the individual tiers of like bronze, for example. So like bronze 3 to bronze 2, there's a promo game. I'm not sure that that's a good idea, but I don't dislike it either. But that's always something that can be changed in the future. As far as like things that they're really missing, it's just like trading is a big one, and then I don't think you should ban at the same time as the other team. Uh, if it adds extra time, so what? That's just kind of the way it is. I don't think you should be able to ban the same hero. But other than that, like trading is kind of like the only thing that they're really missing, other than just time.
Okay. So we're talking about the ban phase and the pick phase when we're talking about trading and being able to ban at the same time. So I want to be very specific, just with the
Yeah.
wording for people that maybe aren't so well versed in what all this stuff that we're talking about. So we're talking about blind bans, and blind bans are there. It's basically the standard for how most MOBAs do their ban phase. The difference, and the reason why this is a very important variable, is that those MOBAs are doing 10 bans. It's like every single player gets a ban, and those MOBAs have like 150 plus heroes. So for the sake of saying blind bans in Pred at like what 35 heroes or whatever we have, it just doesn't
Mhm.
really make that much sense because you run the risk of one like like only two people getting a ban, or I guess it's vote ban. I didn't play. I have no idea.
It is vote ban.
Okay, so you run the risk
I
of,
do
of
think
one
though.
hero being banned total then, I
So,
suppose.
yes. So the problem is that there's only one ban per team. I think if they were to make it two bans, it wouldn't be nearly as bad because typically what happens, even in like other MOBAs, right? You get one character that's just beyond OP, right? You kind of have to ban it. So it ends up getting banned on both teams, and then you kind of wind up, they have 10 bans, you end up with like 8. In Pred, because there's only one ban, you just wind up with both teams banning one pick. And
Mhm.
that's kind of just that OP pick. Whereas if you had two bans per team, it might be a little bit more split where you kind of get that one OP pick out, and then each team kind of gets their individual ban, and then it kind of becomes three bans for the most part, as opposed to, one or two
Okay, so
at
so
best.
let me explore that with you. So let's say like because there's like a super OP pick, a game turns into, and this again is the under the hypothetical that both teams have two bans. Would it not be better for to just remove the blind aspect of it all and to guarantee that there's four bans? Like what is the benefit of not having four bands over maybe having four bands, but probably having three or sometimes having three?
The biggest benefit is just time investment because it takes like if you go snake draft or like snake ban, it just
Okay.
takes longer to ban. That's really the biggest thing.
Okay, so now let me
Uh,
ask. I'll ask this as like a rhetorical question to the chat and to anybody that's paying attention, but a non-rhetorical question to you. Does that matter in a competitive MOBA that's already going to take 30 plus minutes anyways? Like
as somebody that's
adding in
played
like a few
Smite, that was
different
a big
minutes?
complaint in Smite where picks would take too long because there was a lot of bans. So yeah, that does matter.
Really? Even
Uh,
even if it's like
coming from Smite.
one, but we're talking about like one extra ban.
Well,
Like it
it's
would
like
it would maybe
well,
take
well,
like
it's
what,
one
two more
extra ban, but
minutes?
it's also each team bans individually. So if it's like 30 seconds for each team to ban two characters, that's 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. That's actually 2 minutes as opposed to like, uh, you know, 30 seconds in general if you were to just ban two at the same time. And then you also have to count in the time that you're sitting in queue and then also picking. So the picks could be like 30 seconds per pick. So then you have an extra, 5 minutes on there
Yeah,
plus
but
the
all of those
two,
are
and then you're
static though,
sitting in queue
right?
for
Like
10.
like a lot of those different things, like the potential to have long queues, that's not going to change whether or not the ban system changes.
Yeah.
The 30-second
It
timer or
just shaves
whatever
off
it is,
time that's kind of like
it
unnecessary.
shaves off time. But we're what do we like truly think about it? What are we talking about? The max amount of time it could shave? 2 minutes?
Potentially.
Does anybody give a shit? I say anyone. Does
I
that
mean, well,
does 2 minutes
well,
really
then you
matter
think
in the
about it like
grand
this, right?
scheme
How
of
many
like?
games do you play in a day, right? So, like, for myself, I play like 8 to 10 games a day. That could be 20, 30 minutes. I could play a full nother game within that time frame,
Yeah, the average
right?
person's not going to do that though. I'm not even the average player probably, and the 2 minute shaving wouldn't even make a difference for me in a single day. Because
It
I
just
could, at
depends.
most, I
Like
could
the
probably
more
play
bands
like
you
four
have, the more
games.
apparent that problem becomes. Like if you have, 4 bands, maybe that's fine because it's 2 minutes. But then once you get to like, 8, for example, that ends up being like 5 minutes every game that you're just wasting on that could be done in like a minute, right? So I think that gets exacerbated the more bands you have. But with just 4, it's kind of like, I think if they don't want to fully change the system, the best way to do it is to just have 2 blind bands as
Okay.
opposed to
Then
Snake.
like personally for me, and obviously this is a fairly subjective topic to at least to a reasonable degree. For me personally, I think the shaving of 2 minutes per game or per scenario is pretty irrelevant. But let's say it's not for everybody, and that's absolutely fair. I think that the obvious solution at minimum is to do what we're saying, which is like, okay, if you want to do blind bands, you just have to up the band count, right? Like we already
Yeah.
know that tournaments run functionally with 4 bands total. We already, it's very unlikely that anything negative, like too negative, could happen by upping the band count. So at minimum, I think that, and whether we were talking about changing the band system or not, like I thought it was like, for me personally, going into a rank scenario, I kind of expected there to be 4 bands. It just seems like the most common sense thing to do, given the current state of like the hero count in Pred. So I guess like for my position, I'm like a little bit frustrated that there was only 2 bands to begin with, but also just like little bitty things missing. I guess like part of the rank discussion that I want to have is like why did that happen? Because obviously I view the game in a very specific way, very different than a lot of people, or some of us view the game in a specific way, different from a lot of people that started playing with the open beta release. We've been playing for 18 months, which a lot of these things that have been developed over that 18-month period, obviously ranked wasn't being worked on in that entire period. But why after so much time was with ranked being one of the biggest, most anticipated, most requested for feature in a game like Predecessor, because it's a MOBA that's inherently competitive. Why is the ranked mode so bare bones? Like, what excuse is there for the ranked mode to be in its current state on? And this has nothing to do with the fact that they limited it to 1 day a week or 2 days a week for 8 hours each day. Why is it missing so much? What do you think on that?
I might think they just been focused on other things, which is understandable. They've done a lot of back end stuff with like the UI, like the main menu UI and stuff like that. They've done console and all that kind of stuff, and like I can respect that you're doing other things, but I also feel like you're kind of disrespecting the more competitive side of the game, and I think it's just not a priority for them for some reason, which I do think, it might not be the largest player base, but I think it's a heavily invested player base due to the fact that the people that tend to play, ranked tend to grind that game exclusively. Whereas like the more casual players might have a little bit more churn and less overall retention in general. So I think like for example, Steam numbers being higher during ranked, I think that's because the people that are playing ranked are playing that entire period of ranked, so
Mm-hmm.
they're on at that entire time. Whereas in just casuals, they might not play as nearly as much, right? They're just playing, maybe 1-2 games here or there, which is kind of how most casual players end up playing the game. But that ranked player base is that like foundational, like long-term player base that plays the game significantly.
So I have a thought. I'm gonna save it for a later topic on the concept of like what basically the question I asked, why haven't they moved things along a little bit more? Why wasn't it moved a little bit long? Let's go ahead and start wrapping up the rank discussion. Do you have anything else you want to add on it? I'll probably do like a bit of like a closing thoughts from me about ranked, but if you want to say anything about it or, closing thoughts, criticisms, anything, let it rip.
I think the biggest thing is just I hope that they extend it. I hope that they have the faith that their player base would play it. Really, that's about it.
Okay.
I mean, I think they don't have the faith that their player base will sustain the game mode, and I think that's the main reason why they won't fully
It,
release
it's
it.
it's it's interesting. I've heard you say that, and I think that you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do want to question you what you mean by faith in the player base, because personally my perspective is I don't think that they have faith in their product. Like I don't think that they think that the game is going to do well if they keep ranked running. And so I'm curious to hear why you think it's like a lack of faith in the player base as opposed to like a lack of faith in the game, or both, I suppose. Like what do you mean by that?
I think it's just like they don't expect people to enjoy the game mode or want to grind the game mode for one reason or another. Maybe they don't think it's ready enough or something like that, or they don't think people like want that. Uh, and I say that because they released Brawl 7 days a week, 24/7. You could play it anytime you want on every region, whereas ranked was a lot more limited. But the spike from that patch was almost the exact same for ranked being limited as it was for the Brawl patch, which also had 6 items, which was a different significant change, even to the standard mode, regardless of the Brawl mode. So I think not like having that same type of faith that you had in Brawl in like a retention feature like ranked, I think shows a lack of faith in the player base to keep the game mode sustained.
I kind of see what you're saying. I do think that it's like maybe a little unfair to compare it to Brawl because Brawl is just such a short-term mode that it doesn't require the same like I mean let's think about it this way. The worry has to be from a matchmaking perspective, right? Like a density of
Well, let me
players
put it
to
like this,
actually allow
right? So
people
like
to match
the reason I
24/7.
say that is because they had 6 items with Brawl, right? So if you
Mhm.
were to take the 6 items out, how much how many players do you think would have loaded the game up specifically to play Brawl without the 6 items?
I mean a good amount,
Right?
but it was a huge patch, so it was like a very big momentum
That's the
swing
thing, right? So
positively,
it's like
right?
it's a double thing. Whereas I think
Yeah.
ranked is like also really big, but I would argue ranked is larger than Brawl individually.
Yes.
But Brawl gets boosted by the fact that there were 6 items, and I think that's like not like I don't feel like that's as like you can't do that with ranked, which is why I think ranked is a little bit like more longevity, I guess. Like it has a little bit more warrant to it, I would say, than
Do you
like
feel
Brawl would.
like I want to because this has been something that's in my mind about their development or about rank specifically. Does this feel like they're just like playing it safe? Like and if yes, why do you think that is?
I think they're playing it too safe. I think what they're doing is ruining the hype of the game mode, if that makes sense. The entire like everybody's been waiting for it, and there's been like hype behind it, right? And then this limiting factor is just kind of like, you know, let's say you go to eat like a cake or something, and your mom's like, "Go ahead and have some cake or something," and then she gives you one bite, and then she's like, "You gotta wait till 2 hours from now to have another bite," right? Like it defeats the whole purpose of eating the cake in the first place, if that makes sense. So I think they're playing it like a little too safe, uh, for one reason or another.
Okay.
Not sure why specifically, but it might make it a little bit easier to digest if they gave a little bit more communication about it, at the very
Yeah,
least.
we're gonna get to that for sure. So I'll give my kind of closing thoughts about ranked. I mean, just to put it simply, to reiterate, I saw that the ranked mode was limited. I have other things going on. I'm well aware that some people won't even be able to play on the weekends. So I think it's nonsensical to run it only one day a week. I think that there's compromises to be had, right? Because I think that there's a very realistic fear in releasing the game 24/7, right? Like
I agree
that takes an
100%.
incredible amount of faith, and I don't actually know that I even have the faith in the game like that. So
I truthfully don't think they should.
I
I
don't either.
think
Yeah.
I think daily, at the very least, if they want to do smaller hours during the weekdays, for example, maybe they want to do like 7 to 10 on the weekdays or something like that. Maybe shorten it even more on the weekdays, but at least have it available every day would go a long way, and then slowly open it up based off that, because then you at least get data on each day individually,
Would you compromise for
competitively.
Friday through Tuesday?
I mean, I think it would still be better, but that also still kind of ruins the other, like,
Well,
3 days of the
so
week or
here's the
2 days of
thing,
the week, right?
and there's a reason why I said compromise, right? Because they're doing this thing, they're overly playing it safe and only wanting to do it like 1 or 2 days a week for the sake of data, which I don't understand. And you're saying like you're on the other side of the spectrum, saying, hey, I don't think they should do 24/7. I don't think that's a good idea. So it's like, okay, well, we want you to extend it, but extending it in a marginal amount doesn't actually do anything. Even in my perspective, not for data either. I don't think you're really going to get much data out of that. But maybe they are afraid of running it, too long. So let's try to meet in the middle. Give people who can't play on the weekends some days that they can play. Give people who will play on the weekends some days that they can play. Give us 5/7 of the week so that the majority of people can play, or that at least it's like a nice sample size, and still keep it locked to that 8 hour window. So it's like, we get it. Your preseason, we get it. Your open beta, your game's not done. The mode's obviously not done, but let's do something to push it to a more reasonable amount of time where the mode isn't accidentally like useless, because that's what it is. Like the leaderboard, if you look at the leaderboard, it's useless. Like it's not gonna
For
paint,
now, sure.
yeah, it's not gonna paint a good enough picture for anything because the mode's not actually running. So that's why I was just kind of suggesting that as like a
Yeah, I think you
potential
can get
compromise.
there's multiple different ways you could do it. You could do 8 hours on more days, or you could do more days on more limited hours, and then extend those hours based on the amount of interest or whatever, data that they have. I think having it more days, less time would give them more data on each individual day, as opposed to the days themselves being not playable at all, while also still giving that vibe that you can play it every day and have that interest daily. Whereas if it was like 5 days a week, for example, you play 5 days, and then what are you doing the other 2 days? Just not playing the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's better
So
than not playing for 6 or 7 days, or for 5 or
I
six
would
days a week,
agree. I
right?
just think it would be better to play for a shorter period of time on each day, as opposed to longer periods of time on individual days and then not play other days. Personal opinion. Obviously, a little biased as I play the game every day.
Yeah, I could see. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is where it's just getting into like subjective territory. All right, so we'll go ahead and wrap up the discussion about ranked. I mean, long story short, I think we both agree like the game mode is it's feeling like it's defeated its purpose by not being able to actually be played. And then for me, I'm going to step on the gas a little bit more and say I can't fathom the idea that it's not further along in terms of its like actual functionality. Like I don't know why it's missing so much. That's really disappointing. But let's go ahead and talk about balance. So we're going to get into the balance discussion, but I have to give my disclaimer that I haven't played the game for 2 weeks. I played a little bit right after the 6-item patch. I was kind of messing with it. It was cool, like learning some of the items and stuff. But I'm not really well versed in the balance problems. So I'm going to let you kind of take the reins on this one, and I'm going to give my thoughts, post what your current thought on balance is, or the way that things are being balanced, or the way that the game is designed balance wise, or whatever direction you want to take it in.
I mean, I think the balance is not the best the game has ever been in. That's for sure. I think it's probably the least fun meta that the game has had. Do I think it's like detrimental? Like, is the game gonna die because the balance isn't perfect? No, I do think. I wish the last balance patch was a little bit stronger in what they were going to do. In my opinion, I think they do this like light tapping on patches, which is fine in general, especially previously when the game was a lot more balanced. But considering they had such a big balance change with the 6-item patch, I wish they had been a little bit more heavy handed in the last patch, which has kind of led to the meta that's already kind of bad from the 6-item patch to now continuing to be like a little bit stale, which then makes the game a lot more frustrating and annoying to play. And I think that just comes down to the last balance patch not being heavy enough, in my opinion.
Okay, so when you say not heavy enough, just for clarity, you mean like you wanted more swings, you wanted more
Yeah,
change?
I think they should have been more heavy on the number shifts and stuff like that, and like maybe some of the changes that they did. I don't think the changes that they did were bad. I just don't think they were heavy enough to warrant, especially the strength of certain classes or the weaknesses of some of the classes, for example.
Okay. Now, personally, from my perspective, like I said, I'm not going to touch on anything like too specific, but what I will touch on is the kind of current development cycle that we're in, like, 3 weeks patch or 3 weeks balance, 3 weeks content. And I think that the only issue that you run into that, or one of the issues that you run into with that kind of a cycle is when you do say have a balance patch that doesn't hit very well, you're seemingly stuck on it for quite some time. So we
Correct.
have a patch coming up. Catch me up on the cycle. What's the next date that we should expect to patch? Should be like early July.
I believe it's like July, like the first Tuesday in July.
Okay, so it should be July. Let's say estimated July 2nd, because that's the first Tuesday of July. That should be a content release for a new hero. Because you're like we're feeling, or I'm getting the sentiment from the community that the balance is currently very poor. Do you expect that there will be changes in that or no?
I mean, I imagine there will be. Will they be enough? I don't know, to be honest with you.
Is that
Or the next, it's actually next Tuesday is the balance patch.
next
If I'm not
Tuesday,
mistaken.
which would
Yeah, the
be the
26th.
25th, but
Is
okay.
25th?
So yeah,
I'm
if
a
we're
bot.
getting a patch on the 25th, well, so okay, I'm saying, do you expect? I more so should have asked, like, what are your expectations for balance in terms of like, if the current balance patch is poor, what's your expectation? Like, what would you want from a game that's doing well, listening to their community and delivering, in the next
Um,
patch?
I think in general, I would just like to see specific outliers like a nerf they're buffed. Grim especially. I'm fucking tired of playing as that character every goddamn game. It's so unfun. He's so strong that it actually just makes the game unfun. And there's a lot of like characters that are just kind of borderline unplayable, like Rampage, Richter, like characters that you've seen a lot of prior are just like never seen. Like you will just not see
Mm-hmm.
them in games at all because they're not viable. You can't play them consistently and actually have an expected chance to win the game, which I think is really, really bad for the game.
Okay. All right. So that, I mean, that's our thoughts on balance. I didn't expect this section to be very long. I think in general, like the only overall sentiment I have is like it does suck whenever you kind of get a poor balance state and then you feel seemingly stuck on it. So
Yeah.
hopefully
I
they'll
think
continue to iterate and listen to feedback and make some changes.
I really hope they go a little bit more heavy-handed on this one, just to, at the worst case, they get the high from the last patch of like these characters are strong and these characters are low, and then they can get the opposite in the next patch if they were to go a little bit heavier, and then you meet somewhere in the middle on the following patch. I think it would just be at least like better than it's strong, it's still strong to it's strong but it's not OP. Like I think it just leads to like like a bad slide when you do that, and instead of just going like it's strong, all right, we didn't nerf it enough, it's still strong, to it's bad, all right, now we put in the middle. You know what I mean?
Okay, one last question about balance, and then we'll move on. If the ranked mode was running at a reasonable amount of time, like let's just say your subjective amount of time that you want to be able to grind the ranked mode, would you be worried about the balance? Would the current state of balance stop you from grinding the ranked mode?
I would be less worried because one, you get better games theoretically. Even if because it's like limited times, whatever. Theoretically, there would be more of a reason to like play certain things. You could ban stuff that's OP. For example, if I didn't want to play against Grim every game, I could just try to ban Grim, right? And then I wouldn't have to deal with it. There's also no mirror matches, so it wouldn't be like I'm playing a game and there's two Grims on each team. Like it lowers the fun of the game. You know what I mean? In my opinion, because it one lowers variety, then it also takes away the ability to remove something that might be oppressive or unfun in general. I
Okay.
think it also leads to probably better data in general if for their balance, which would then theoretically make the balance patches better because they're getting more high quality matches to look at than they would in standard.
Okay, and just to reiterate, because I kind of specifically want an answer to the question. Like, if the game was running, the ranked mode was running at a reasonable amount of time, would the current state of balance stop you from grinding the ranked mode?
No,
Okay, I just wanted to hear that.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, no, no,
The explanation's good, but I wanted to hear that because I think that
yeah.
speaks volumes about how balance is important, but it's not as important as having like a reason to play the game and grind the game, and that people, dedicated players, despite the state of balance, will still grind and play the thing and engage with the game in a competitive, serious way, in a way that feels rewarding for their time, despite the balance being, what I've heard, again, just sentiment I've heard, probably like one of the poorer patches we've had in terms of balance. So I just think that that's an important point to make. So, all right.
Yeah.
Next we have the topic of the pred problem, and this one is probably the one that I'm most excited to talk about specifically, because I think that there is a lot at play with the state of pred and what's going on with pred, and what the problem is.
So can you elaborate on that? Because I'm confused. What do you mean
Yeah.
by the problem? Like, what is the
So
problem to you?
that's the very thing. It's a subjective thing, right? What is the pred problem? Like, to you, what are the problems? You can make that plural. What is the problem for you? I want to open up the floor to you to be able to say, like, this is what you take issue with, and you can kind of just take over from there, and then I'll kind of do the same or expand on what you have to say. So for you, define the problem or the problems that Predecessor is facing as a game currently, and it can be
Uh,
as surface level or as deep as you want it to be.
I think the biggest problem is just being able to gain and hold interest in players, especially long-term players. While they do have long-term players, it's not like as much as other games. Like when you look at other games, there are people that'll play that game, 10 years out, and then they're still enjoying the game the entire time. And there's like a lot of those people. I think Pred doesn't have nearly as many of those people. And as a MOBA, that's kind of like your goal is to have those people. People that play League, they play League, they got 20,000 hours in League, things like that. What the fuck is this that I just looked at on your screen?
What do you
Uh,
mean, bro? That's you.
but anyways, that's like one of the biggest problems. And I think the other problem is just like the lack of speed, which I don't really care as much. I don't really care about as much the speed. Like it's slow, sure, but as long as it's good quality, it doesn't matter to me. The problem is that they do this like slower stuff, but then they also don't have things fully done when they actually release them and things like that. And then when they fully release them, they don't come back and fix the things that aren't finished with those systems that they didn't have in place to begin with. Uh, which, for example, like in ranked, they don't have drafting, right? Or like
Hmm.
not drafting, sorry, trading. Um, the fear that I would have would be they release the mode and then the mode is out 6 months out and there's no trading still. Like at some point that has to be put into the game mode to complete the game mode. Otherwise you can't fully release it, right? So there's been systems like that they've put in the game that I hope that they continue to fix that they just kind of have overlooked for now.
Okay. Um, I agree. I think I'm going to keep my like response to you as simple as possible because I have so many thoughts about this particular talking point. That if this is like if I was ever to be in full rant fashion, usually on the podcast I tend to be a little bit more collected. This will probably be the most ranty section of what I have to say about Pred. So the problem is, and the reason why I made it singular myself, or non-plural myself, is because there is a problem. There is one problem, and it comes out in the form of a bunch of different problems. And so basically every problem that you as an individual could identify as a player, it always comes down to one thing. And the problem, and I'm going to expand on what all of the different problems are because of this one problem, is that the developers' capacity to develop the game is lower and less than the ability for a player to retain interest. That is the problem. The problem is that their output, how much they can accomplish in a work week or a month or multiple months or in a season, is less than the player's ability to stay interested for long term. So when they're developing all these things, the players, they love the game, they want to play the game, they're interested in the things that are being worked on, but the developers never actually meet those expectations. And we have seen this historically. We've seen it for 18 months. Some people have only seen it now for a few months, but it's right in front of all of our faces. Season 2 roadmap, lots of items, including ranked, on that early access Season 2 roadmap did not get delivered on. Competitive nights, terrible on paper. Every single person that plays the game seriously could have told you that was a terrible idea. The affinity system, an absolute joke. Still to this day, an absolute joke of a system that should have been a good faith system, a reason to grind the game to give us something. The contract system for unlocking heroes, terrible system. We advocated against it. They finally had to undo that work and went against it. Created the Amber system. Far better that we have the Amber system. The Amber system as a free to play content currency, still a terrible system, unfinished system, nothing to spend it on. I mean, it's every aspect of Predecessor is missing something. Every single part of it. Literally every section of the game, there is missing something. And the developers are, if you've ever heard this term, you'll know what I mean. They're in the weeds. They can't catch up. They lack the capacity. Now, when I said this 8 months ago, 10 months ago, 12 months ago, it sounded mean. It sounded like I was shit talking them and hating on them. It's never been that I meant to be mean, and I still don't mean to be mean. I'm just looking at the issue and I'm identifying it. The developers, whether it be, and I can't tell you exactly why they have this issue. It could be poor leadership. It could be inexperience. It could be the actual developer size, not the studio size. They have 70 to 80 employees. It could be their actual developer size. It could be so many different things. The project pipelines and the development pipelines for the ways that they're actually, handling these things. It could be accountability from, the developers or the employees from their management. I mean, it could be so many of these reasons, but for whatever the case is, we can see that they're always failing at something. And so, 9 months ago, they announced Affinity. They launched Affinity. And I remember Robbie going on Predcast, saying something like, we just really wanted to get this out to y'all. And, we don't have the Affinity token, which, for the sake of explaining, the Affinity token was supposed to be like a free currency token that you could earn just to unlock the Affinity system for free for per hero. And so they said, we really just wanted to get it out to y'all because we knew that y'all wanted it. And we haven't made the token yet, but if you don't want to pay for it with platinum for premium currency, just wait. That was 9 months ago. And here's the thing. It's not just that it was 9 months ago. It's that it was 9 months ago, and there has been zero official statement as to why they haven't ever done anything with that. We have Amber. So it's not just the fact that they have failed over the last 9 months. It's the fact that they have failed over the last 9 months and they don't say anything about it. They have failed over the last 9 months and they refuse to catch us up. They have failed over the last 9 months and they made the Amber system and seemingly don't do anything with it. So it's not that there's just one problem in Pred. It's that every problem exacerbates the problem in front of it.
I would agree. Now, the counterpoint, just to play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say theoretically they were like, let's say they had come out, maybe 4 months ago, and they were like, the reason we haven't finished Affinity is because the person that was doing Affinity is now working on Ranked, for example, right? Would that
Yes.
be an acceptable enough answer for you to be like, all right, fine, like just do what you're doing, you know what I mean? Or would you want them to continue to finish that game mode, like finish the Affinity system first, but delay Ranked in order to get that finished before they do Ranked, for example? Or would you rather have like a 50-50 on both, right?
I think you have to finish whatever project you're on.
I
Now,
would agree,
would
but I
would
was just
that?
curious on your opinion.
Yeah, well, I think unfortunately, 'cause hear me out. The real answer is they need to find a way to speed everything up. But let's say like
Yes.
for whatever reason they can't, right? It's not possible. So then they come to us and say, we can either finish the thing we started or we can move on to the next thing. I think in that scenario, then you finish the thing that you're working on so you can earn something, right? You need to earn good favor with your community. And so if your community is like me, or someone, or people that, believe like me, and I'm just looking at everything that has failed. And when I say failed, it's not obviously like a 100% failure, but if you failed to complete the thing and do it in the way that you said, it's a failure. You failed to do the thing that you said you were going to do, or that you were trying to do. So if you fail at everything, then you never look good. But if you accomplish something every now and then, even if it's slow, at least you're accomplishing something. So like with Affinity, again, I don't even know how it's possible to have made it 9 months since the release of Affinity and there not be a way for us to spend these hundreds of thousands of amber that some of us are sitting on to unlock one of them.
I would
I I
100% agree.
I simply don't like that. There is no
Not even
other
just Affinity
word.
though. It extends to like every aspect of
It
the
does.
game.
It absolutely does.
Like why can't I spend it to rent a character instead of permanently unlocking the character so I can maybe try them out, right? Things like that.
Well, it extends
Being able
itself
to buy like
to,
other cosmetics or
yeah,
like
it extends
recolors of
itself
skins. Like it extends
to,
to every aspect that you could potentially spend currency on. That just seems like it on like some would say that it's like 50% complete. I would say it's honestly like 25% complete, maybe 30%. Like I
so
think
I think it's irrelevant what the percentage of completion is. The fact of the matter is it's not 100% complete, and it's been ample time, more than
I mean,
ample
I
time.
think if it was, 80 to 90% complete, it wouldn't really care as much. Like if you could buy everything except for like, icons and stuff like that, right? Like you probably wouldn't really care because it's
Yeah,
not
okay,
like
that's fair.
super
Yeah,
important,
that's
right?
fair.
But like it being like 30% complete is the problem, I think. Whereas if it was like more like 70 to 80, I don't think it would be nearly as much of a problem. And I think there would be a lot more, like it would be a lot more easy to forgive them for not having finished it yet. You know what I mean?
So, okay, I want you to do me a favor, and I want everybody in chat to do this as well, or anybody watching the VOD of this to do this as well. Think about a time, not Pred, think about a time where you've jumped into a game in like a beta, phase, an alpha phase, an early access phase, and think about that feeling that you all have, because I know we all have it, where when you get on that game for the first time, it's exciting because it's new. You're looking at all the things that there are to be looked at, but you also can easily, and I mean very easily, identify that the game is missing so much. Sometimes you can tell just by looking at the UI, right? You can go on the home screen of the game and you're like, oh yeah, this game's definitely in development. The problem is that Pred still feels that way, and it's been a very long time. And then so when you, and I've said this in the past when I'm criticizing Pred, when you look around at Pred, like you physically click around, then you start to see it literally. So you click on your profile. There's nothing in the profile. It's just it's a bunch of nothing, right? It's a bunch of little icons of which there's not
Mhm.
much of. There's not even much artwork in there, and there's no stats, and there's no match history. And when like if you look at the spectator mode, it's super bare bones and really bad. And again, so it's like this issue of them being too slow, or I guess I'm gonna split the issue a little bit. The issue of them being too slow and or just never actually completing anything, it makes the game, the product, not the gameplay, but the actual product itself, the game inside of a box called Predecessor, feel very, very cheap. It makes it feel super, super cheap. It's very obviously underdeveloped, and it feels very obviously unfinished. And the only saving grace that they have that anyone could possibly give them any kind of leeway on is the fact that it's called an open beta. That's it. And anybody that sticks around for a game long enough knows that that means fuck all, right? Like calling your game open beta, it just stops mattering at a certain point. And so I think someone came at me on Twitter. They were, upset with me or whatever. And they said, well, all you ever do is complain and like you never say anything positive about the game. Well, here's the thing. the product of what I'm saying, like where my thoughts and opinions come from, is purchased by them through their actions. And what I mean by that is that in the early days, I was super hopeful. In the early days, I was super positive. The developers liked me. I was, I had this, pretty light, personality in the community. But that well runs dry, right? Like that ability to be hopeful and optimistic runs dry. Like I can't stay optimistic if you don't ever give me anything to be optimistic about. And I can, like when people say all you ever do is say negative things, well, one, that's not true. They're just only seeing the negative things. Like I praised Brawl. I think Brawl's good in the game. I think adding the 6 item slots is good for the game. But when 90% of your output is negative or unfinished or poorly implemented, then 90% of what you have purchased from me is bad word of mouth marketing. It's the direct correlation to the developer's work and to their response to our feelings. And so no one can blame me for the criticisms that I have and for the way that I speak. I mean, I guess you could be upset with me for the way that I act, but you can't blame me for the things that I say when it is a direct correlation to the output from the developers. And so the game is so obviously lacking. And so, when I say things like Predecessor has good gameplay, I make the distinction very intently. Predecessor has really good gameplay. I think most people agree. When you physically put your hands on a controller or physically put your hands on a mouse and keyboard and you play the game, it feels good. There's some clunk there. There's some things that aren't great, but whatever. Every game has that. But the game, Predecessor, there's gameplay and then there's game. The game is bad. It is a bad game. It's hard to recommend to people. It's hard to love. It's hard
As a
to be
whole,
hopeful
I
about.
would agree.
Yeah.
As a game itself, like playing the game, do I think the game is good and has the potential and the foundation to be really good? Absolutely. I wouldn't play it if I didn't. But as a game, I literally had somebody in my stream earlier that played Smite. I could not recommend it to him. I could not say, he said he downloaded it and he wanted to play. I told him, look, truthfully, I don't think it's worth your time. Do I want to say that? Absolutely not. But I would rather him not play it today and then play it, 3 months from now and actually stick around than play it today and then play it for 2 days and then not play again. Because what always ends up happening when I get people to play the game is they play it for 2-3 days, they lack a reason to play, they no longer play the game. And I see it all the time, and it's like one of those things that the game is good and it is actually good. They just need to finish what they built already, if that makes sense, to
Yeah.
actually get to that point.
Yeah, and again, I think that the very damning part of it all is just the fact that like nothing they've ever built has really been completed well. I don't want to say nothing. It's I'm paraphrasing, I suppose, or just being not too specific. Like some of the things that they've done have been successes, right? But the majority of what they've done, I think, have been failures, so to speak. They just haven't accomplished enough in the time frame that we have been around, and even in like the 3 month time frame, because we're coming up on the third anniversary, like the 3 month part of 3 month point of free to play. I think it released on the 28th. So in about a week, the game will have been released open beta, free to play for 3 months, and in that 3 month period, there's been very little progress made. There's been a new game mode that's good, that is solid. There's been 6 item change that's solid. It doesn't feel impactful over the long term, but it is solid. Like it's really really good. But they're not making much forward progress in a lot of the big areas that matter. And so one of my biggest issues with the game, or some of my bigger issues with the game, is obviously like monetization. I think monetization is atrocious, and we could have a full conversation about that if we even need to. But it's also that issue is exacerbated by the fact that you have nothing to spend Amber on. So, it's just all of these little unfinished things on top of bad decisions. So it's not just that they're slow; it's that they're slow, they don't finish things, and they make bad decisions. So, like you said earlier, this is specifically why I wanted to bring this back up. You said like, yeah, the ranked mode was missing things. There was things that like weren't, that aren't completed with it or weren't great. But if you had more time to play it, you would play it, right? And
The
so
thing is, even uncompleted, I think the way the ranked released was probably better than the way they released anything else. Like if Affinity was 30%, I would say ranked had a significantly higher percentage than anything else that they could have released up until this point. So I think in that aspect, it's still better than what they've done previously. Even if 60% is better than 30%, it's still not complete. It's just more completed than what they put out previously.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also just the fact that it's like a major retention system, right? So, like, I think that
Agreed.
like it's a shoe-in to be successful to some degree because it's a huge system, and we're looking forward to that. Like, what would you expect to retain more players? Them releasing Amber purchases for other content where people can actually grind Amber and purchase things, or ranked?
Uh, t- Honestly, it depends on what that person played. Like if they're a brawl player, they probably don't care about ranked, right? If they're like, the casual Andy that plays on Saturdays, they probably care more about getting some stuff in the game. But at the same time, being able to like unlock stuff in the game now gets you more invested in the game because you're like, oh, I got this cool skin. Let me go play this character, right? And then you get more invested in the actual game itself. So they kind of do the same thing. It just depends on the target audience, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I would say probably ranked. I think more people would immediately be more excited to jump in and
I would
try their
probably
hand at
agree.
ranked.
At this point, I would agree. However, if you were like, 6 months ago, I don't think it would really have made a difference which one was which, as long as it's more than what we have now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah, but all that to say, I don't know why any of this stuff isn't being completed, right? Or
I would
implemented
agree.
properly um or anything like that. Now, okay, so we've talked about the problem, we've kind of expanded more specifically. There is a problem that sits on top of that. Now, this is a secondary problem, but it actually is pretty freaking bad. On top of the poor decision making, on top of the being slow and not completing things, they just seemingly don't communicate about any of it. And that makes these issues so much worse. Because if there are reasons why you can't do XYZ thing, if there are reasons why you don't want to do Z thing, dude, just tell us. And
Yeah.
so there was I can find it. I'll read it. I probably won't bring it up on screen because I'm lazy. There was a tweet from one of the community managers, Carrie, and the tweet to
It was just a
me,
let them cook tweet.
the tweet to me is very interesting, but I'm going to read it and I'm going to let y'all know why. So they put out their tweet on the 19th, which was 2 days ago, and it was basically them saying like, "Hey guys, get excited! We're making rank 2 days a week instead of one." And so Carrie said, and again, to be clear, Carrie is a community manager for Ometa. She said, I think that people need to trust the process a bit more with this one. Game dev is complicated and sensitive. So many games fail. Studios get closed and staff get laid off. The only way to give a game the best chance to survive is to be sensible, deliberate, and follow the data. I'll work on getting a Pred report out in the coming weeks to discuss this process and other things in more detail. So to anyone in the Pred community, please drop me any questions you have, and I'll see what I can get if I can get them answered in said upcoming blog. But here's the problem with that. You're telling us to be sensible and follow the data, but you give us nothing. Like you say
Yeah, I
nothing.
would agree.
You
It's
don't
also
you don't tell us what the data is. You're asking for trust without having earned it. And then in the follow-up to that response, it's like, "Oh yeah, I'll get a Pred report out in the coming weeks." In the
yeah, I
coming
feel like that
weeks?
should have been out. Like if you were going to put out a pred report, it should have been before the mode even released, in my opinion.
Or it
To
should have been, but it should have
like
been linear. It should have been parallel to when they announced the 2 day a week, right? Because then you
agreed.
you drop and
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
"Hey guys, we're dropping the
Then you
ranked
could at
mode
least
two
you
days
could
a
put some
week.
data in
Here's
there or
why."
something
Yeah,
like that they
this is
got
what
from
we're
that day,
thinking.
right?
And so I think we all are feeling it, right? It's the disconnect from what we actually are asking and saying and giving feedback on, and from what they're doing that is so frustrating. Because I think that you know what, you're right. I think that I am starting to agree that they don't have faith in their players, because when I feel respected as a player, it's like my leeway goes up. I don't know if I said that. That sounds kind of weird, but my ability to be lenient is much more present, because when you respect me with information, then I respect you with faith and with trust. When you respect me with communication, I respect you back, right? But when you just say, "Hey, you need to trust the process a bit." Well, here's the thing. Like 12 months ago, I trusted the process and I was disappointed for a year straight, right? I'm loosely defining that time period. But now you've burned my trust. I don't trust you. I don't believe in the game. I don't believe in the project. I don't believe in the people running it. I don't believe in your ability to make good decisions. So why would I trust you now? And I could get into the discussion about like, oh, well, if you don't like the game, why don't you quit? Like, yeah, we could talk about that. That's an easy thing to explain. But more or less, to just be literal to the things that someone that is working internally at the company has said. If you want trust, and this is directly to Ometa, if you want trust, earn it. Like you ran that dry, and I'm still here and excited about the potential of what this game can be. But you're gonna have to ask us a little bit more than just to trust you and to be sensible when you're not giving us anything.
I would agree. I think it's the lack of either, right? If you're not going to communicate, get it done. If you're not going to get it done, explain why,
Yes.
right? Or at least tell us like anything, right? Give us something that you're working on, right? Something like that. Like they were talking about those skins, something like that, right? Like the turtle skins or whatever, right? The undertow skins. Show us some of that like in the client or something. Whatever you got going so far, right? Show us something. Do anything. Like if you're not gonna give it, give a sleight of hand, right? Like, maybe we're not doing this. Look over here, right? Just to kind of like buy some time or something. Like communicate anything. They communicate
Yeah,
absolutely
well,
nothing on
and so
any
I'll
aspect of
I'll
anything.
I'll
It makes
touch
zero
on that.
sense.
I'll touch on that again because this also came up in the Predcast. They've basically abandoned the idea of like dev content as well. Like every now and then, Robbie will do a
Agreed.
video, but so when Stegs came on, if y'all don't know, Stegs is another one of the community managers for Ometa, the developers of Predecessor. When Stegs came on, a lot of his focus, and he said this himself, was that he wanted to be very content focused. And so, I think it was like the Wraith trailer was like really good. It had like a lot more personality. And he actually even said like, oh, that wasn't actually me. But a lot of people in the community like gave him a lot of credit because it was like right after he came on. But he was excited about that. And I remember him saying something on Twitter like, we're going to try to keep that up though. Even though I didn't have a hand in that, we're going to keep that up. So he was coming on as community manager and wanted to be very content focused. And so back in October, maybe early November, whatever the time frame was, it was around 9 months ago. They did a stream on the Predecessor channel. You can go find it. It's the last thing on there. 9 months ago, and it was called Design Time or something like that. Design Time, and he had 3 developers, and they were answering questions, and they were being very publicly facing and talking to the community. Now, I will say that stream was a fucking nightmare. It was really bad, mostly just because the chat was like super cringe, and even me, one of their biggest critics, I thought people in chat were just being ridiculous and being really cringy. But that aside, it's like the ability to get out there and to like put your face in front of the community to say like, hey, this is who we are. Like, be personable, right? This is who we are. This is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Like, build rapport with the people, be a human to the people, and then give us some information, or kick the can down the road in a way that feels better than you just disappearing for months and then every now and then dropping some patch notes or like a pred report. So
I think
yeah.
it's sorry, good.
No,
I don't want to cut you
yeah,
off.
I was basically gonna wrap that thought up. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it's ironic that after they said they were gonna do more dev stuff, it actually feels like they did less. Like there was less communication after that, which I think is kind of weird, for whatever reason. Even just something like, play with the devs or something, right? Like they just, they have Stegs on there playing, 2 hours on. Why didn't they do like a Stegs plays ranked on Saturday, right? Something like just simple like that is very easy to do, right? Just to kind of like promote the game mode, right? Do something like weird. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be weird. It can be simple. Just do something. But I don't know. It's just it's a bit disappointing to say the least.
I mean, I'll put it this
The
way:
lack.
you have an entire creator Discord and creator program. You could use them for things like do a stream where you take one of your creators or 2 of your creators and one of the community managers, and at the same time or like shortly after launching the patch notes, do a stream with the creators and go over the patch notes together. Or have a designer there and have one of the designers go over the patch notes with one of the creators or competitive players. Or do a stream where it's like, hey, we're going to do community games with Stegs and Pinzo or Stegs and Soul Reaper. Come join us, try to snipe us and get in our lobbies. It's like it's the presence of effort is more, it like earns you more than being silent. And so it's like it's not even that you have to do these grandiose major gestures, but it's that when you do nothing, we notice, right? Like we notice that it like I can pay
Yeah.
attention and look and see, hey, you're pretty quiet. Like what's going on? So that comes down to like maybe the community managers, maybe to the management above them. But I just think that it's like if you're doing nothing, then that is a choice, right? Like choosing to do nothing is a choice, and like your invested player base, like we notice, like we take note of these things. Like I specifically, I feel like I'm really petty though. um I like keep receipts of like everything, and sometimes I don't even have the literal receipt, but I like remember things. So like specifically when I said like I remember Robbie being on Predcast, or no, this is a good point. I'm gonna scrap what I was saying. But like for example, they like to do this thing where like a dev will go on a third party platform or like a third party show, and they'll give a lot of information there, but then they simultaneously themselves have said like oh, like our own socials, like Ometa socials, don't reach a very large portion of the player base. So how could you expect that the other third party platform is going to reach a large portion of the player base? So like if you have something to say that's worth saying in like a somewhat official capacity, why wouldn't you say it in an official capacity? Like so it doesn't make sense. Like you'll have Robbie will go on Predcast, or other designers or community managers will go on Predcast, and they'll say these things. Or I think they did something with another creator, a European-based creator. I can't remember what it was. Like, so one of the developers did an interview with like someone, and they say all these
I'm not
things that are
sure.
important to say, but they don't say it officially. So it doesn't feel like communication, because like one, I could miss it or someone else could miss it. So I just think that this is very much so pointed at the notion of like your lack of effort is noticed and your lack of communication is very, very present.
I would agree with that point.
Any last thoughts about the problem of Pred, or the problems, or anything you specifically want to get into on that?
I mean, I think you covered most of it. Like that's pretty much it. It's just do something or communicate something at the very least. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very frustrating to be invested in the game and then just get nothing for 9 months, right? Like
Yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of freebies that Pred doesn't take.
agreed.
For example, the rank they lowered the ranked requirements, right? From level 30 to level 20. If the problem is that there's not enough people to be level 30, which I assume would be the issue, or people like don't want to grind to level 30 or whatever, why instead of doing it that way did they not choose to do like a double XP weekend or something like that, right? Give people like a reason to play, or do it like on a day where ranked isn't out so that they can grind the game on non-ranked hours at the very least, right? Like something like that, just to give them more of a reason to play the game. Why did they take the approach of we're just gonna lower the requirement instead, right? Like they've never done anything like that, which I guess kind of has the problem of they've never had a reason for people to be a high level, and then they've also don't have anything for people to spend amber on. But they could do that at the same time. Especially, I think ranked was a good idea in terms of when they could have done that. It just kind of seems like a missed opportunity, and I think they do that a lot.
Okay. I mean, I think that like an idea like that, regardless of whether it's for the purpose of getting people into ranked, is a good idea regardless. They just haven't taken anything
I
like that,
agree.
right? Like they could have been doing that like every first weekend of the month for the last year or something almost, you know what I mean?
Agreed.
So yeah, no, I agree.
Especially for
To
like open beta launch and stuff like that. Like that would have been fantastic since people have to earn characters and stuff like that, right? Like just stuff like that.
I know for me, I like to be very intentional with what I say. And sometimes because I have so much that I say, I want to circle back to the conclusion of this specific topic, which is like the problem of Pred, or the Pred problem. So to summarize my problem that I have with Pred, the best way that I can say it is that I believe that Ometa's, and I said it already, but I'm going to reiterate, I believe that Ometa's output, meaning the work that they do, their ability to release content or communicate or release new systems, etc., is lower. It's lower than that of a person's ability to retain interest, or for the majority of people playing Pred to retain interest in the product. And so what that leads to is it leads to people being disgruntled. It leads to people having, criticisms about the game. It leads to people feeling unhappy, and ultimately it leads to the dwindling of the player base that we kind of see slowly over time. So let's go ahead and dive into the next topic, which is player population. Now, this is an interesting topic because it's one of those topics where it's going to come out a little bit subjective. You kind of just have to use a little bit of common sense on this one. But yes, the only thing that we can look at is Steam. And, I think that anybody that knows how these things kind of go knows that even though we don't have full player numbers, obviously we don't. I can't say that we do. I have no idea what the player base is. you can make reasonable assumptions, like educated, reasonable assumptions about what's happening in the game from a player based population standpoint by looking at the data that you do have. It's not 100% conclusive, but it's still pretty good. So,
It would be reflective theoretically on all platforms.
exactly. So, Soul Reaper, what do you think about the current state of the player population, given what you've seen or what you want to bring up or whatever the case may be? What are you feeling about player population with Predecessor?
I mean, it's on a slow decline since open beta, which is natural, right? You're gonna have more players for open beta, right? Because everybody's downloading the game for the first time, they're trying it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, the slow decline implies that you have a lack of retention. You have two ways to go. You can go down or up. If you have a lot of content or like retention features, things like that, then people stick around, and then it starts to spread with like word of mouth, things like that, right? And then you can go up. Uh, but Pred's kind of been on like the little bit of a decline, which is fine, right? It's fine to be on like a soft decline as long as it's not too heavy, which it hasn't been super heavy, right? You know, it's maybe like a couple hundred average here or there. But then they come out with these bigger features, and then you don't see that go back up, which is the biggest problem, just due to the fact that there's really no retention in the game, which is okay for some people. But how long does that stay okay for, right? And I think we're kind of reaching that point after open beta where a lot of people are not being okay with that, with the lack of retention. And I think ranked is kind of like the big retention feature that a lot of people have waited for, especially people that have played since PC release, early access. And it just kind of like it feels like a slap in the face because they're kind of like nickel and diming your time a little bit.
So to be more specific, what would you say you've seen in the last few months? And again, I'm asking like specifically, what have you seen numbers wise, or what have you felt in your own analytics or the analytics that you have available to you via, whether it be Twitch analytics or like Twitch trackers or Steam charts
Um,
that have like identified a kind of trend for you? What do you feel like you're noticing?
I feel like there's a lot of interest in the game, just as like a content creator. Like people are interested in the game, but there's not a lot of people that like the interest that you see via like content does not reflect the interest within the actual player base in terms of player numbers, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So like YouTube and stuff like that and Twitch, like those all have been going up or like neutral. As far as like actual numbers in terms of like Steam and stuff, it's just been a slow decline since open beta, which I don't know if that's like telling or anything, but I think the interest is there. It's just they don't really capitalize on it the way that they should, in my opinion. And I think that's just due to the lack of reason and or cool things added to the game. For example, when they added the 6 item patch, they had like the highest spike that they've had in a very long time, probably since open beta released. And I
Mhm.
think that's because it was a big patch and people were excited to try that patch, which is just the interest that people are trying something. Same thing with ranked. When ranked came out, you saw like maybe like a 20-30% increase on Steam numbers at peak. That's just because people are interested in that because it's a big feature. It's a big retention system. It's something that people are interested in. And I think when you limit those, you kind of see what's happened this week where it's been kind of going down to the point where they've actually hit their lowest peak, I think, since open beta, which is, I don't think, a good thing.
Okay. So from my perspective, and this is just kind of the trend that I've noticed through all of gaming in general, or the years that I've been doing content or playing games. You have natural declines of games always. Like that is like
Yeah.
that is just the way that it happens. Like a game can never retain 100% of its players. It's not possible. A business cannot retain 100% of its customers. It's not possible. So you just can kind of like use like your experience or the way that these things kind of work, the things that you've observed to make a reasonable hypothesis about it. So if the game is in a constant state of decline, you have to ask yourself the question of, well, what gets players back or what gains new players? Like how do you retain a healthy player base count in a game if we know that the default expectation is that a game's always in a constant state of decline? Well, it's implementation, it's new systems, it's new content, it's new hype, it's yada yada yada. So we've seen this open beta releases, player number spikes, right? That was a big spike, right? We went down from like the PC player base having like concurrence of like 500, which again that's just concurrent. I can't tell you what the total active unique accounts logging in and actually playing were. It's much more than 500. But so then we see spikes, and so then and again I'm just speaking to the data that I can look at. Then we see for a good bit the PC numbers alone on Steam we're kind of retaining around like 5,000 active day, concurrents a day. Then you start to see that dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, and then you have the moments, you have the implementations, the new patches, the new spikes. So 6 item patch, brawl patch, big spike. Release of ranked, big spike. But the trend should be obvious enough for someone to make a reasonable hypothesis about it. Again, the trend goes right back to the decline. But the thing is like you have to try to assess the decline and question whether or not it is a gradual or a slight decline, and whether or not the current decline is healthy. Like, because it can be like, oh, well, if it's not plummeting in player base, then it's not that big of a deal. And I don't think that the game is drastically losing players, but if you look at just like the last 3 months, like we've probably lost, just again, I'm going to keep reiterating, we've probably lost close to like 40 to 50% of concurrence just in the last 3 months alone. And so what does that tell you? Again, all of this being very hypothetical and making a hypothesis about it, well, it very obviously tells you that the game lacks retention. So if the game lacks retention, it means that the game's not being developed at a rate, like I said, fast enough for the people that are interested, right? So when I say, and people like to tell me like, oh, well, obviously that's just the PC numbers. But is it not a reasonable thing to expect that human behavior across the board is probably very similar? Like, is it not reasonable to expect that, yes, this is a trend that we're kind of recognizing over the PC Steam charts, but why? Why would you expect that a player playing on PlayStation or Xbox would feel differently? And why would you expect that the PlayStation or Xbox community is actually growing as opposed to also in a state of decline? Do you think that there's any argument for that?
Um, I mean, I just think kind of hit it how it was. Really, the game is just on a constant decline, as is every game, right? You have to keep stuff
Mm-hmm.
fresh and give people a reason to continue to play the game long term. Otherwise, it just becomes kind of like a chore to play the same game over and over again for most people, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have the plan of enacting with chat because I just don't really see the point of it. But it is interesting because like I think it's a relevant thing to talk about. I do think that it's interesting to see how people are just saying like how me and you are negative and we're whining and bitching about the game, but it's like I feel like we're being very reasonable. And this is the thing that never sits well with me when people say stuff like this. Is like I feel like we're being reasonable. I think that we're talking about kind of like topics that you have to really explore to understand, and to say like to ask the question, because that's what I did. I asked the question of, if we can see with actual data that the Steam PC player base is in a state of decline, why should I reasonably expect that that is not a consistent theme happening across the board globally on all platforms? And the reality is that if you're a smart person, if you're a betting person, you would absolutely assume that because it's common sense. And so I could say, like, I could just say, like, oh, well, I don't really have the numbers and I don't know. Or I could just use a little bit of fucking sense and say, like, yeah, it's probably pretty reasonable that that's happening. Now, here's the thing. Just because I've made that hypothesis, because that's what it is, it's not me speaking with facts. It's a reasonable, it's an educated hypothesis. If it's a hypothesis, then I base my opinions and my criticisms off of that hypothesis. And I base my opinions and my criticisms off of my experience as a player of the game, as a player of the genre, as a player of other titles. And so that's all that I'm doing. Now, the irony is that if Pred was doing well, would the game not be growing as opposed to declining? Like we can identify, like, because here's the thing, I need to be very specific about this. Would the game not be growing at least and then start its decline at a healthy level as opposed to where it's at now? Because this is something where I think it's deeper and most people can't understand this. Do you think, and this is a non-rhetorical question for you, Soul Reaper, do you think, given the current player base size, that the game has the possibility or potential, or currently is, a profitable title?
I would say in its current state, the game is not profitable.
Do you think that the game is in the red?
I think they would have to be, just due to the fact that they developed for years before being early access. So I would just say inherently they would probably have to be. Do I think it's like the game is dead, 2 months from now? Probably not. Like, I'm
Exactly.
sure they
I
have
agree.
like years worth of, funding still. However, do I think the game will grow in that time at the current pace? Probably not. It could probably stagnate and kind of bottom out like it did on PC for a while. But I don't think that population at that bottom point is where you want to go. Like, I don't think you want to go there to begin with. Like, that bottom, I don't think is the spot that you want to be at. You want to be somewhere like between that and your peak, as opposed to at the bottom, right?
Okay,
You
so
want to be
we've
somewhere in that
we've
middle.
naturally slipped into the next talking point, which is the question of, is Pred dying? Now, I'm going to answer the question. You kind of answered the question yourself just a bit ago, and you can step in whenever you'd like. The answer is yes and no. And the reason why the answer is yes and no is because the question of, is Pred dying, is very subjective depending on what kind of death you're talking about. There is no single definition for the death of a game. Now, you can choose to define a game, or your definition of it, and that's fine, because that would be your definition, and I'll give you a couple. So there's multiple ways that a game could die. Mainly two, in my opinion. I think that you can have a very perceptual death of a game, or you can have a literal death of a game. Now, the literal death of the game is like, oh, studio is shutting down, servers are shutting off. That game's dead. For example, previous game in my history that I've played was Infinite Crisis. It was a MOBA, DC Comics MOBA. That game's dead. You can't play it. It's gone. It's literally gone. So that's a dead game, right? But you can also look at titles. Let me try to think of something. I think Realm Royale is still active. That game's dead, bro. The servers are on. Heroes of the Storm, the servers are on, but it's a dead game. And so that's a much more perceptual death. Yes, the game is technically being supported to some degree in terms of just them financially funding the servers, but they're not implementing, they're not creating. And I think that if anybody has any experience playing or following or focusing on live service titles for any period of time, then you know a core pillar to a successful game and to not a dying game is the constant implementation of new content and patches. So if you look at Pred, they have that pillar. The game is not dead in the sense that the game is online, and yes, they are constantly updating. But again, we've already talked about how the game is being developed at a rate lower than the player's abilities to retain interest. So in short, my answer is like, yes, the game is dying, but it's not like, I'm not so certain that the game is going to kill over anytime soon. In fact, what I would hypothesize is going to happen is a very gradual slight death of this game. I think that they're sitting on anywhere between 13 to 15 million British pounds in their bank. We saw their financial reporting at the early part of this year. They were sitting on like 15 million British pounds. So I'm going to estimate between 15 and 13 to 15 million British pounds. They have money. They're obviously financially funding the project, and they're doing fine in doing so. But I'm also smart enough and have enough common sense to know that there's no way that this project is profitable. There is a 0% chance that they are currently profitable. They are not profitable in the sense that their burn rate, the amount of money that they spend annually, is most likely not going to put them in the green. They're just not. It's impossible to think that that's happening, because the game's player base isn't big enough, and because the content that they have isn't big enough. So or isn't vast enough or well fleshed out enough for people to actually want to engage with it. So there absolutely is not. There's a 0% chance they're in the green. And also, to speak to a very specific point, because I'm so tired of seeing this come up every so often, I remember there was a period of time where Robbie said, RGS Ace, Robbie, the CEO of the company, said, oh, if we were to just have the console player base alone, we would be just fine. I promise you, that's a lie. It's not possible. It's not possible. The very concept of them saying that is ludicrous. Now, he might have been speaking to the total number of accounts that logged in, because devs like to do this weird thing where they talk about much less literal things, and they talk about, like, you know how when like a dev team or a studio will post like, oh, we've had 100 million accounts. It's like, yeah, but that's not your concurrent player base number, so it's irrelevant. He might have been saying it like that. But I promise you, they do not have the player base size currently to sustain the project long term. They are burning money faster than they are making about it. Faster than they're making it, I can guarantee that with certainty. So, in a sense, I think to answer the question myself, yes, the game is dying, but it's not like rapidly dying. I just think that we are much closer and inching in towards the perceptual death of Pred, because the longer that the project runs the way that it's being run, the worse that the actual players feel about the project, which means the worse that the word of mouth marketing gets, which means the less and less people would want to be interested in joining and playing the game, or the people that do join and come play the game aren't going to have reasons to stick around and play it.
Yeah, I would largely agree with what you said. I do want to address something else what he said in the chat though.
Sure.
They asked why we're complaining, just play the game and like hype it up and spread it to people. The problem is that spreading the game to people, they will not be retained due to the issues that we're talking about, which is the entire like point, I guess. It's not that we're complaining, we're simply just pointing out the issues. If you don't shine light on the issues, they won't get fixed. Simple as that,
Well,
really.
yeah, and also like I would say that it's not our responsibility to spread the game to the players out there in the world. It's a nice thing, and we're definitely happy to do it whenever we think it's appropriate and whenever the game's going well. But the reality is that like they have marketing budgets and marketing teams for that. The problem is not getting more players. The problem is not player density. The problem is the fact that the game is not actually a good product to retain the players. So if even if we had 5 times the player base currently, that player base would kill off. It would, because there's no like the reason why the current player base is slowly declining is because there's no reason to play the game. So the issue is not that of there not being enough players. Like that's maybe a 1% issue. I'm not really concerned with the player base numbers. The reason we bring up player base numbers is to identify a trend in the current player behavior and perceptual of like the way that the players are perceiving the title currently. So it's not a density issue currently. It's an issue with development and strategy and implementations of content and monetization and dev speed and dev communication. It's everything else.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm not here to convince people that the game is dying. I'll give you my opinion. I do think that the game is dying. I do think that it's probably the most likely outcome that this game will not be successful, but that's just based on what we've seen from them. And so, to the developers, I'm not trying to be rude, and to the community, I'm not trying to prove to y'all that the game is dying. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, like Joey said, shed light on the issues, because if we shed light on the issues, then in a way, it's our way of giving criticism or putting a little bit of pressure on the developers to attack those issues. So, for example, like let's try to be constructive, right? What is like the number one thing that you would, if Robbie pulled you aside and said, "We need help," what would you help? What would you help them with? What would be your feedback for them specifically? Or like if they said, "Help us start the first thing that will get things turned around," what would you ask them for?
One, communication. Two, just get things done and finished, man. Like that's it, really. At the end of the day, it needs to be done. It needs to be finished. If it's not getting done and it's just getting like halfway done, put into the game, and then never touched again, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Like that's really it.
I think I would probably lead off with like, "Hey, look, if they were asking me now, right now, how do we help, right? Or how can or what can we do?" I would probably tell them the first thing is to open up ranked. Like, "Hey, look, you've already gone this far. Open up ranked, start communicating, and then really nail down your projects." Like, again, I think that when you move on to the next thing and you haven't completed the thing behind it, you leave room. It's the margin for error for criticism, right? Like, had they, because think about it, let's say Brawl and Ranked weren't out currently, right? Hypothetically, Brawl's not out right now, Ranked isn't out right now. But in the last 3 months, they were able to accomplish releasing Amber purchases for content and Amber purchases for Affinity. Well, you know what that would do? It would put me, I'm just speaking anecdotally, it would put me in a position where I would say, they got this thing done. That's good. I'm happy that they got this thing done. They should have done it faster. Definitely, I would say that. But I wouldn't be complaining about the fact that that wasn't done and complaining about something else that's also not seemingly done well. So, yes, Brawl wouldn't be out right now. And yes, ranked, version shit of ranked wouldn't be out right now. But I would at least be happy with the fact that they completed the thing that needs to be completed before moving on to another uncompleted thing. So I would absolutely tell them my main, like one as part of my main criticism, that they need to focus and finish the projects that they start before moving on to the next.
I think the problem is that when they move on to another project, they just forget about their previous projects as well. I think that's like such a issue, um, for one reason or another. Like you were saying about Affinity, the fact that that hasn't been completed and it's been 9 months, yet they are doing these other things like adding Brawl and stuff like that. Like I get they want to get that stuff out too, but then you're still just neglecting the previous systems for some reason.
Yeah.
And if that's like if there's like a valid reason, communicate that, really.
All right. So last topic. I don't know if you're pressed for time at all, because we could probably take like a few questions after this.
Good
But
to take questions.
yeah, last topic from me is, now what? Like, I kind of touched on that. Like, what do we say to them, right? Like, as a community, because this is something that I feel like I see often. People will say like, "Well, the developers are doing their thing. What can we do as a community to help?" Personally, my perspective is that I've done everything I can. I genuinely believe like reaching out to them privately doesn't do anything. Trying to do shows like this, even this is completely useless in my opinion. I personally feel absolutely hopeless. I think that they have taken their ship, they have steered it in the direction that they want to, and they will not do anything other than go in the direction that their compass is pointed at, right? And that's fine. It's their prerogative, it's their game, it's their money, it's their investment, it's their title, it's their livelihoods, their jobs, right? But for me, the now what is that I'm mostly recusing myself from the game. I'm not making that a declarative statement to say I'm quitting, I'm gone, fuck you all. Like I'm not doing that. I'm mostly recusing myself because of the fact that I'm going to be focusing on playing Pokemon TCG competitively. I'm going to be focusing on my relationship, and I think that if and when the game gets itself to a point where it does look attractive to me, I'll come back. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do. I obviously will still engage with the community, pop in streams, talk about the game on Twitter, and share my feedback and stuff. But more or less, I'm just kind of like gonna focus on other things. So not quitting the game per se, but definitely taking a big backseat. So Soul Reaper, what do you think? Now, what for you next, right?
I mean, for me, like this is kind of like really the last try I can give. Really, like I do everything I can, right? Like I'll talk to them when they're in my chat. You know, I'll put feedback in, whatever. Kind of say my piece, but like at the end of the day, it's not up to me. And at some point, like something else will grab my attention at this rate. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case because I do like the game, but like I do my thing. I stream the game. You know, I try to do what I can for the game. But at the end of the day, if they don't want feedback or they want to do their thing, that's fine. But at some point, even somebody like myself will end up not being retained as a player. As much as I hope that that's not the case, and I hope that they end up changing for the better. That's really all I can. That's it for me, really. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I said it
I've more or
earlier in
less
the
given up
show.
at this point, right?
I think the ability to have good faith with them and to trust them and to be optimistic with them, it's a resource, right? And I think for me personally, they've just run that resource out. Like they had that and they never filled it back up, right? Like they never refilled the well of my trust and my faith in the project. And there were times, there were moments for sure. When they scrapped the contract system, I was super excited. I really felt like they listened to feedback and they did, and I was excited about that. But now at this point, it just feels like and you know what? I'll give them credit at least in saying that they make up their mind about what they're doing, and that's what they do. It almost feels like they don't give a shit. I don't think that they don't give a shit about the game, but they just don't give a shit about what people think about the way that they're doing things. They make their decisions, they stick with them, and that's what they do. So I guess I'll go ahead and open it up if anybody in the chat has anything for us, any questions, and then otherwise we'll wrap this up and move on. But yeah, I mean, I think for me to just or to kind of conclude my overall thoughts on the game, after 18, I think almost 19 months of development since the early access PC release, I think the word disappointed like wouldn't do it justice, right? Like it just doesn't feel like there's any way possible for me to feel like they have succeeded over that time period.
Yeah, I would. I don't want to say they haven't succeeded in some capacities, but I think
There
in
have been
the
wins,
general
sure.
capacity of it, I don't think like they've lost more battles than they've won. I feel like,
Yep.
unfortunately.
So Mr. Med said, "What's my favorite Pokemon deck currently?" I'm playing Charizard EX. It's kind of taken a hit in the meta, but that's what I'm maining at the moment. So, yep. We found someone more hated than Soul Krashy, Pinzo, and Zygar. Y'all are crazy, dude. Y'all are crazy. Can I ask the question what you're expecting per month? I mean, for me, like that's a little bit hard to answer. It's not that I'm expecting anything per month. I'm just expecting more than the nothing that they give, if that makes sense. And like that's obviously like a bit harsh, but in general, they don't really give communication. They don't really give updates on what they're working on, which would be communication. They don't really give the completion of systems, right? And so I think in like for me, I want to see more effort, and that can come in the form of communication, but it could also come in the form of them actually accomplishing things, right? Like I said, some of the big ticket things that have just been completely like I don't want to say they've been completely abandoned, but they've just never been finished. Is like the affinity system being purchasable for free. We've never heard an update about that. It's been 9 months. The Amber currency coming out, like that's good. It is an inherently good thing, but we can't spend it on on anything. The rank system now is coming out, but it's very incomplete, and obviously it's new, but it's very, very incomplete. It just feels like they don't ever actually complete anything, and it feels like the game is being developed at a very, very slow pace. Would ranked times being 4 hours on weekdays and 12 on weekends be enough? I think that's enough. I mean, I think we could get very subjective about how much time and when and stuff
I
like
think
that.
that would be better than what
It
they're
would be
doing
better than
now,
what it is
right?
now. Exactly. It would be better than what they're doing now. So I think
It
that
would be a positive direction,
yes, yeah.
at the very least.
I mean, I personally, if I was them, I would do 8 hours, 7 days a week.
I would as well.
That's the sweet spot. If they wanted to compromise, do 5 days a week, 8 hours. Do you think that they can expand the dev team or cooperate with another dev team? I think cooperating with another dev team is very unlikely. They would probably just need to hire more. Now, I think that comes with risk and cost, because obviously if you hire more, you have to pay more in salaries and benefits and things like that. But I think that, choosing to not take risks leads to things like this. And what's the famous saying? You have to spend money to make money. So they said that they're going to open ranked up week by week, though, in the blog, though. Well,
the problem with that is that ranked is supposed to be a grindable game mode that you can put a lot of time into. When you limit it to specific days and then you draw that out over, let's say they did 1 day a week, right? That means we're not getting 7 days a week until what, August? Something like that?
yeah, it's just bad.
August, September, like that's terrible.
They simply should have just launched ranked. And so here's the thing. I think I saw Survivor say this. They need to be more bold and have faith in their own product and take risks to just do things and then adjust along the way. They always want to try to nail things down perfectly and not take any risks. And that, like, the reality is that choosing to do anything is it's a choice, right? Like it comes at a cost. If you choose to run the ranked mode only 1 or 2 days a week, what you get out of that is less data and criticism. If you choose to run the ranked mode, say 5 to 7 days a week, then you may run into issues, but you'll also at least have people that are playing it, and you'll get the criticism from that too. But I think that that's the issue, is like, if you never take risks and you never try things out, then you'll never give yourself the ability to adjust along the way. And you just end up with this, where things feel like they're not being done, or they feel like they are not capable of taking risks or completing things.
About adding a battle pass. I mean, a battle pass is fine. It's like positive. Do I think it's like necessary for the game to have high retention or something? I think it's a retention feature in a capacity of itself, but I don't think it's like a requirement. I think they could do that.
I mean, I think
Do
it
I
would
think
be.
they will? Especially every big update? Probably not, but they definitely could.
But that's the thing. If you do battle passes, you run them in seasons. So they should do like a 2 to 3 month season, name it or something, put a theme behind it, make a battle pass, sell it for X amount of money, and then make it actually worth the player base's money. I have no problem with battle passes. I think it's fine. I think my issue is that I don't believe they'll do it, because I think they lack the capacity to complete that kind of work, right? Like, if they can't deliver on the things that they're working on currently, why would I believe that they could also make a good battle pass at a fair price and actually fill it with content to deliver to the player base when they can't even do that normally? So no, there's no way.
Okay, interesting question by Tang, actually, because it made me think of something real quick.
Yeah, go for
no,
it.
I'm not like that. It made me think of like the gadget, like her default skin gadget.
Mhm.
Why is that not in the game? Like,
I don't know.
they already had it made. You could use it in the game, and it's just not in the game. Like, where did that go?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Like,
listen, there's a lot of things like where you ask a question and it's almost like you have to laugh at the end of it, because it's just such nonsense that it's not there, right? So, like, for example, so we didn't even really talk about monetization much, but I could say something like, I said something like the monetization is terrible. And when I say that, what I'm saying is, like, the prices are too expensive, but even the business practice behind the bundle is bad. Now, I've put a lot of thoughts into this and talked a lot about this, but like, the bundle for the Bellica skin it's not only greedy and overpriced, it's also terrible business strategy, because you had someone, I think Bearded was a perfect example of this. Bearded was like, oh, I really want one of those skins, but I don't want any of the rest of the stuff. And he is literally, there he is sitting there willing to give you money, and you won't even take it, right? Because you're busy doing the thing with the bundle where you want them to spend the whole thing and spend $50, but he doesn't want any of the content. He only wants the skin. And you know what he does? He just doesn't buy it. And so not only is the content overpriced when they do sell it, it's also not even a smart strategy to bundle it all up and not even give a discount for it. So it
I
just
think
doesn't make any sense.
I was about to just say that. It's very weird to have a bundle that's actually not discounted.
Yeah,
The whole point
it's
of
a
a bundle
bundle
is to get it all
only.
for a cheaper price. That actually makes zero sense. I don't know
And
why they
well,
do
that's
that.
what I'm saying. Okay, so here's the thing: the term bundle is it literally a bundle? Yes, because it has all the content in it. But the strategy behind monetizing a game with the term bundle is the intent to bundle at a discount off the premium in order to upsell the customers. That is the monetization strategy. Now you could say, well, Krashy, what game or business degree do you have to know that? It's called common fucking sense. Like, I've played other games and I'm smart enough to ascertain that that is the purpose behind that strategy. So not only are they not selling the content at a reasonable premium, they're not even using and employing the business strategy that has been tried and true for like at least a half a decade. So when I say that these developers are amateurs, it's because they're fucking amateurs. Not only do they not know what they're doing, this is their first title. Half of them are not even fucking developers. They're former fucking Paragon players.
Let
Like,
me ask you to
it's
calm down a little bit.
nonsensical.
You're kind of
No,
ranting a
sorry.
little
No,
bit. I know,
I
know you're
did. I
passionate.
know.
I know
I
you're
know.
passionate. Like,
I'm
calm down a
sorry.
little bit. Calm down a little bit.
I'm sorry, but it's true. It's just it's
I don't disagree with what you
frustrating.
said, but like you know, you're getting a little ranty. I don't want you to go off on a tangent and
Okay,
get
okay. You reeled me in. You reeled
off
me in. You
base.
reeled me in. But yeah, but it's true. Like, I do genuinely believe that it simply comes down to a lack of capacity and a lack of knowing what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, and so that's kind of my take in general.
I think it's just a what's the word I'm looking for? Like I don't feel like they understand the point uh that they would get more if they were to change the strategy that they are currently using. People pay for it. I mean, just because people pay for it, Creed doesn't mean that they wouldn't make more money by paying. But like if they were to lower some of the discounts slightly, right, for the bundles or something like that, they wouldn't make more money by selling more units, right? So I think it goes both ways there. There's points on both sides.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of monetization, they missed. Well, not even just monetization. I think they miss the point often on what they're trying to accomplish, and that is detrimental to the perception of them as a studio, but to the health of the game, and ultimately literally detrimental to the game and its player base in general.
Yeah.
Well, Soul Reaper, any final thoughts, chat? If y'all want to throw us any more questions, feel free. Otherwise, I think we're gonna wrap this up and sail into the sunset and hope that, in the coming weeks we get a Pred report to explain what the hell's going on.
I got nothing really as closing remarks. Anyways, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
What about yourself? Do you have anything left that you feel like you need to state?
I mean, look, man, I probably could confidently say that I have like one or two people inside Ometa that I like as people. I have oftentimes, I think it's easy to attack Ometa as a symbol, right? Like when I say like this dev studio, I'm not really speaking about everybody because it's not fair to speak to everybody. Not everybody is at play here, and so for me, I want to be a little bit more specific here to say I actually feel bad for anyone that works at that studio, or I feel for them. I don't want to say feel bad. It's not pity. I feel for anybody and have sympathy for anybody that is at that studio that feels the same. And it would be naive to think that there isn't. There are absolutely people that are working internally that are questioning their own management silently, and they're sitting there thinking, what the fuck are we doing, right? And I feel for them because I know that this is their livelihood, and I understand that the level of investment and potential that they see in the game as well, and it has to be a shitty feeling, right? It has to be a shitty feeling reporting to work every day and also feeling like you're not making progress or you're not where you wish you were. So I don't want them to fail. I think people think that like the self-fulfilling prophecy of my doom saying is what I'm looking for, but it's not. I always wanted them to implement and do more and to grow and to learn and to change, and I think that they're doing that. They're literally doing that. They're just not doing it well enough, fast enough, and I don't think that they're succeeding. I don't think that they're succeeding. And so, I'll always say, even if I was to say 100% that I'm quitting right now, never coming back and actually do it, I would still wish them the best in their endeavors because they're people, right? At the end of the day, they're people with jobs and families. And I want nothing but the best for everybody on this planet. So I hope I'm nothing but the best for the people that continue to play the game. If you're enjoying it, know that my intention is not to dissuade you from enjoying it. If you're enjoying it, ignore me and move on, dude. Like, ignore me and play your game. I love that for you. I envy you because if I could play the game and post it and have fun with it, I definitely would. But I just can't. I don't have the capacity to do that. So, for the dev studio, I hope that you listen. I hope that you can take something from this. For the management at Ometa, I hope that you listen. I hope that you can take something from this. I wish all nothing but the best as a community, as streamers, competitive players, PCC staff, viewers or community members. And that's really all I want. I want Pred to do well. I just fear that it never will. So
I just want to point out to Jedi Steve real quick, saying that you should get into game dev. At the end of the day, it's not about like the standards are set by the industry, not set by us. The industry sets the standards. The industry standards are above what Omida is currently producing, in my opinion. And I don't need to be a game dev to see that or to point that out in the first place. And I think saying that you should be a game dev and then revisit your own stances doesn't mean anything because it would still be the same. The standard industry would be the same, regardless of if I was a game dev or not, or if Krashy was a game dev or not.
I'll tell you something I learned a bit, not that long ago, but long enough that it's relevant. Good games grow and bad games die. It's just the way that it is. Like, and don't get me wrong, there have been good games in aspects, in ways that it didn't make it. Absolutely. We all can name a game that we wish was still around because it was so good. But if you're speaking from the full picture of business to monetization to content to strategy to the entire bigger picture of a game that was truly good, good games stick around and bad games don't. And then you could tell me, oh, well, there are bad games that stick around. Like, oh, Fortnite's a terrible game. Well, guess what? They have millions and millions of players. So sorry to tell you, you're wrong. You may not like a game and you may have loved a game, but the reality is good games live and bad games die. Good games grow and bad games don't. Good games sustain and hold a player base at a profitable standpoint and bad games don't. So at the end of the day, it's not my standards. Like Joey said, it's not our standards. It's what the live service free to play player base players in the world want. It's what they expect and it's what they're willing to deal with. And so if you have to question if Predecessor doesn't have a large enough player base to sustain profit, the question is why? And the answer is because the game's not good enough. So I hope that we see that happen. Joey, do you want to sign off or let people know where to find you? All that fun stuff that people on podcasts do.
I mean, people know who I am, right? If you're in the community, you know who I am. Whatever. You can find me wherever. I do want to say Mercy sucks at jungle and his comms are trash, but that's pretty much it for me.
True. I agree. All right, friends. I made this. It's not really an announcement, but I made this post on Twitter. Starting July 1st is the start of the new Pokemon like path to worlds. My goal for next year is to play Pokemon TCG and try to earn a world spot. So I'm going to be doing everything I can to play TCG, play with my little deck of cards, and go to a bunch of events and try to make it to worlds. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. I'll see y'all around in Pred. I'm definitely not like quitting, but we'll see. It just kind of depends. And
he's quit for the 5th time, boys. Get him.
Yep. I haven't you already quit this game? But in any case, I'm passionate about something and I'm excited about it. So I'll see y'all on the next one. Thanks everybody for coming out, and we love Pred.